Hello and welcome to a live inspirational common unity collaboration, hashtag LICC. Yeah, okay, so that's what I've got to start telling people, hashtag LICC. My name's Markabadi. It is lovely to be here on this Transmutational Thursday, live from the big island of Hawaii. Yes, Hawaii Island. Lovely ocean view. Good. Welcome. What a great show we've got today. We have a fantastic speaker, a fantastic architect, an archaeologist of the human system. Today we have the Reverend GPK, George Peter Kansas. He's going to be speaking on the emotional archaeology and remembering our mycelium nature. So the Rev, my first experience of him is fantastic with his partner Tracy. Was with Z in a community known as Eden, which is a couples counseling, couples togetherness, coupledom community. We can talk about that another time. Rono and Sierra, you can see that interview on my backlogs. Let me tell you a little bit about the Rev. He's passionate about supporting men and women in emerging from our current situation better than before through a deep practice of reconnecting with self and others as self. That's the mycelial web. We'll talk about that in a minute. George has helped turn spiritual practice into practical business strategy for almost 30 years. And he's shared the marquis with inspirational greats like Zig Ziglar and Denis, Waitley and Brian Tracy. An author of 8 books, a former lawyer, recovering lawyer, good job, single dad, a 2-time cancer survivor, likes to do things in pairs. He's a presence advisor to some of America's most talented rock stars. You can find out more at gpkspeaks.com or bigfulcrum.com. Cool. And in the meantime, please like and share everything you see here. Yeah, cool. So without further ado, let's bring in George Peter Kansas. Welcome.
Thank you, Markabadi. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Such a pleasure. Such a pleasure. Tell us about what it is that you do then. How do you sum up your magic? Have you got an elevator magic pitch?
I don't know how much of an elevator magic pitch it is, but if people know that they've got a message, a purpose, a light inside themselves, and they haven't quite figured out how to shine it as brightly as they know they're meant to in the world, I am both a rock and a mirror to help them bring that out into the world, fulfilling their purpose and their destiny and their deepest desires all at the same time.
A rock and a mirror. So, I mean, that sounds kind of paradoxical in a way. Do you find that that's an important aspect of your work is to hold both sides of the coin?
Absolutely. That's a very astute observation. Yeah. The rock part is about being an unshakable stand. Once I've seen the light in someone, which usually doesn't take me very long to see, I'm a stand for their full expression, whether they like it or not. And that's the rock part. And the mirror part is without attachment, without judgment, without shame, blame, or guilt, I can reflect back to someone, again, without attachment to it, just sort of dispassionately reflect to someone what I see as far as the light and the shadow and how to make them work. Life is full of paradoxes, you know, and learning to dance among and between them is, I think, you know, maybe our greatest opportunity as far as expression, as far as purpose, as far as healing, all of those things.
Absolutely. Now, what's we talk about unshakable. What's the difference between that and being stubborn?
Maybe nothing. That's a great question. I am stubborn. When I've seen somebody, somebody said to me once at an Eden event, actually, a woman in a coupledom who she had witnessed me be such a stand for her man in that moment. And I had been for her earlier that evening. And she said to me, why are you such a determined stand for me and my man? And I said, if you had a dear friend that you knew for 3 decades and they had seen the very best of you and you had seen the very best of them, would you tolerate them being anything less than that for them? And she was like, she got it. Because once I've seen somebody's light and they've basically said to me, I want to bring it out into the world, well then I'm a stand for them. I'm a full stand for them to do that. Because
yeah. No, carry on.
This actually is an important piece, because every example of that I've discovered in my lifetime, that they're shining that light, they're speaking that truth, they're serving that purpose in the world, benefits the world. I've never come across an example where someone's been passionate about a message or passionate about shining their light, and bringing that into the world would be detrimental to the planet. Right?
So is it important that they ask for it? Like, how much is there? Because a lot of people seem to find they might be lost in not knowing what their light is. So is it important that they, from the start, kind of say, right, I need to do, like, I'm in?
Well, yes, in some ways. So I'll answer this in 3 parts. The only reason why it wouldn't be necessary on the one hand is because someone may they may still be on their journey to discovering that that's true, that they have a light, a mission, a purpose inside them. And that's okay. There can't be anything wrong with that. People are on their journey. Right. And if they're a yes, the reason why they have to be a yes is twofold. One is because, well, in the most sort of commercial terms, one is because the commitment to work with me, for instance, requires an investment. It requires an investment of time, energy, love, money, all these things. And so their yes has to be substantial enough to warrant that investment. But on a meta level, and a much more important level, they need to be aware of their yes, because they're the ones. I can't wake up for them in the morning and move them through their routines, right, and turn their routines into ritual. I can't wake up for them and turn their rituals into ceremony. I can't perform those ceremonies on their behalf. I mean, I can to a certain extent, but I can't do that for them. They have to do it themselves. They'll do it with me. I'll walk with them, but they must take the steps themselves. So there is a yes there that is required to a certain degree. Yes.
Right. I mean, certainly for them to continue on in the practice. But what about this notion of kind of like unsolicited advice? Like, you might see someone's light, and then you're like, hey man, I can see that you're doing it you're not shining, you shine. But
it's a great question.
Who the hell are we to come up and like,
totally. Actually, I love that you asked this question, because how many times have you been in circles, certainly circles that we travel in, where someone just, I see your chakras, and
I think I was in one last night, George.
Yeah. And which is beautiful. Like, gosh, if somebody has that in them and they want to share, it's beautiful to a degree. And I'm always mindful to ask permission myself. I'm like, I want to give you a reading. Like, easy does it there, pal. I'm all down for that. I'm down for that. It's got to be, you got to meet me, and it's got to be a permission-based thing. And then the circles I've led with men, and women, it's always been an absolute must that, and we call, Tracy and I in our work, we call it an imposition-free zone, that I'm happy to share my gifts. I'm happy to share what I see. I'm happy to share my reflections, and people pay dearly for me to do that. And I love to do that. And I never do it unsolicited. I'm like, hey man, you've got a little Klingon on your shoulder and your aura, and let me do that for you. It's really imposing. And I don't do that myself. And when I see people do it, like, or they try to do it to me, I'm like, I'm good. You didn't ask for permission,
What would be a way? I mean, because of course it's kind of like of service, right? And something in mind comes to the notion that, you know, the Christians, when they did the whole Crusades, they thought they were being of service, right? Obviously they were being assholes, but the point is, you know, we hopefully with a certain element are being of service, and the service is to empower other people. And so if you see somebody that's going around with these sort of unconscious patterns, how would you approach them? Like, what would you do? Would you just not do anything, or would you just go and be a space for them? How could you help somebody who maybe you don't know?
It's such a great question. It's a beautiful question, because I think a lot of people actually have a sense of knowing. Probably people who will see this interview, hopefully, and follow you and are in your world. They have a knowing, and they want to know how to share it, because they want to be generous. We want to be generous. We have something that we feel really will be helpful. And what Tracy and I practice, and we're really passionate, we support each other in this, is a practice we call compassionate curiosity. And it's not an assumption or a presumption that we know better, because invariably that's not true anyway. I don't presume to know better for anybody. You know, I don't walk in their shoes, and until they've said, George, I really want you to help me, walk with me here. I approach it from a position of, I want to know more. You know, even frankly, Stephen Covey wrote in that famous book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, seek first to understand, then to be understood. I think that's brilliant. That's such wisdom. And so if I'm with somebody and I'm seeing them either like they're out of sorts, or I see a light in them that they're not bringing fully to the world, I ask about it. I say, you know, what my number one is, what are you feeling right now? Because if somebody can answer that honestly with presence, and you know, I can feel that, that's a pretty good indicator that they're on a good track, or at least they're present. And if I'm feeling super, like sometimes I'll get what I call lightning through an extension cord. Like I'm getting, so people call it a download or a transmission, just an absolute certainty in my body that I want to share. I will say, I have clarity on something. Are you open to me sharing it with you? And if they're not, or this isn't the right time, or let's follow up later, great. And if they're open, we drop in.
Right. And so then curiosity is something that's come up a lot in these interview series, the power of asking questions. And that quote you made, you know, seek first to understand. How much have you found that asking questions is pivotal?
Oh. It's fundamental. It's so, by that I mean like the literal meaning of the word fundamental. It's such an integral part of the foundation of everything that like we were watching some old Barbara Marx Hubbard's interviews. Right. She was a brilliant thinker, and just a bright light. And she asked such big questions like what, I don't even remember, something about raising the level of consciousness. Tracy and I were like, oh my God, that's exactly our thing. And we crafted our question is, how can we support the elevation of the consciousness of the conversations on the planet, so that the consciousness of the planet is elevated? That question inspires us every day. Like literally every day. Is what we're doing today supporting the elevation of the conversations on the planet? And so, because we do speaker training and conscious communications training and all this stuff. And so the right question makes all the difference.
Right. And so, okay. So
can I? And the exciting thing is the why behind that is we don't always have the answer.
Right.
We don't wake up knowing I'm going to do this because that, and that. But asking the question opens up the possibility.
Yeah. So the question opens up the possibility, and it's like, I mean, again, Carl Jung said the greatest gift we can give anyone is a space to be heard. And,
Oh,
and I love that. How does that relate to
yeah.
asking ourselves questions? Like, can we do it to ourselves, or do we need the external mirror reflection?
That's a great question. I mean, both. You know, we absolutely can and must do it for ourselves. I think, you know, Aristotle said the unexamined life isn't worth living, you know. So I think we must ask ourselves really powerful questions, and sometimes challenging questions. And the reason why I feel it's so helpful to have either a mentor or a community or a support group or whatever around us, and this is why we're so passionate about building community,
Mm-hmm.
is because we don't always hold ourselves in the discomfort of sorting out the answer. It you know, like we ask a question, how can I speak authentically today, or bring my most powerful voice into the world today? And then right away, without hesitation, all of the little voices encoded in our neural pathways in our nervous system from childhood, you know, from 0 to 7 on, come up and try to convince us that we're not worthy to answer the question.
Right.
Or it's not valuable. The answer isn't even valuable, let alone our voice in the world. And all these little voices that pop up. And it can be really, I mean, that's the master's path, to hold yourself in the discomfort of addressing those voices. Right. And so what we found in building our community, we call it the amazing community, and Eden too, is holding someone, and I love the Carl Jung quote, holding someone to be heard as they kind of squirm in trying to answer those questions without judgment. Nothing wrong with that, those voices. We got to love them too. And in fact, bringing love to them is how we heal them. Right. And so if that's why it feels important to have people around us, whether it's a mentor or a support group or a community or all of them.
Right. So is it important to feel like discomfort? Like, is the discomfort the kind of compass direction that we should be looking to go towards? Like, where do I feel most uncomfortable? Oh, that way. Let's go that way.
That's a great question. I don't know that I seek out discomfort. You know, on the one hand, because I'm on the path I'm on, I find plenty of it. I don't need to really look for it, because if I'm exploring, for instance, if I'm committed, which I am, to exploring the boundaries of my consciousness and pushing the boundaries of that consciousness, then I'm definitely going to have plenty of opportunities throughout any given day to step over what I call the why bother line.
Right.
So I'll be out there exploring the edges of my consciousness, and by that I mean, should I push myself and lead this conversation? Feels a little scary. Is it, you know, for instance, on Saturday, we're going to host a conversation for fathers in celebration of Father's Day, and honoring and calling men to arms of love. And it pushes my boundaries a little bit. Right. And so I'm sitting down exploring this conversation, and I'm like, yeah, I know that I can occupy that space, but it's still a little scary. Putting myself out there in a certain way is still a little subject myself to some vulnerability there. So that's a line of the boundaries of my consciousness. And I can choose in any given moment to stay safe in the comfort of what I know, which really isn't that comfortable, if we're honest.
Right.
Or I can step over that line, why I call it the why bother line. It's like, because everything I desire, every aspect of my biggest expression, the biggest version of me, the best, the most enlightened version of me, is on the other side of that line. And so I muster up the courage. I address those voices in my neural pathways that say, no, you're not really that, you know, your voice isn't that important, and step over the line. And that's why I love, and I know how good it feels to step over that line and occupy that space, even in failure, because it was more important that I stepped over the line.
Right.
And that's why I'm so passionate about being a rock for somebody right there. Yes, it's important you step over this line, because everything that you've dreamt about your capacity to hold a space for yourself, let alone the world, is right there. Is right there. Your toes are on that line. Come on, let's jump over it together.
So, you know, you said that it was important to have the reflective process and almost the mentor and the community to hold a space of acceptance and kind of loving kindness for your discomfort.
Yeah.
So the what do we do when we're feeling negative, like we're feeling depressed? Like, so I've been through times where I feel depressed, and there's a part of me that enjoys feeling depressed, that's embracing it. Should we be embracing our negative, you know, things that we don't obviously want to be, angry, depressed, all the negative stuff? Should we be embracing them like, welcome friends, I love you? Or should we be kind of like, all right, look, you're getting stuck in the spiral pattern of, you know, continuing to propagate the thing?
Oh my God. First of all, I love your questions, brother. I love that you're seeing such nuanced pieces. It's really a delight. It's both. Like, yes, these things that we've come to call negative do sometimes put us in a spiral pattern, and that don't feel in service to our expression or our purpose in the world, for sure. But even that doesn't mean we shouldn't and can't and embrace those pieces of us. Because, like, for instance, I was raised in a family, sort of regular upbringing, right? My joy was encouraged and my anger was discouraged. My sadness, oh, don't cry. I mean, how many people, and it's not out of malice. My parents, anybody's parents, usually doesn't say don't cry because, you know, they think crying is evil, or don't be mad because they think being mad is evil. It's because it's inconvenient. It's a question of timing, almost always. I mean, as a single parent, I raised my kids 20 years on my own. I know that sometimes kids' emotions are really inconvenient. Like, you having a fit in a grocery store is decidedly inconvenient.
Right.
But it's not evil. That's how the child knows how to express him or herself in that moment. That's why, parenting is like parenting, business, money, the greatest spiritual teachers in the human experience, because we're confronted with, oh yeah, if I'm really not concerned about convenience, what's easy for me right now, what's comfortable for me right now, I can bring love to this moment. I can bring patience to this moment. I can bring curiosity to this moment. Like, even imagine, had I, in my tantrums, been met with, what an interesting way to express yourself. Why are you talking to me that way? Like, rather than, don't talk to me that way, right? It feels loving.
Loving, yeah. I mean, it seems like society is not even close to that sort of level of, you know, acceptance and loving nature. Why do you think that is? And what do you think a solution might be to societal change so that we can, you know, embrace that? Is it at the individual level? It's just everyone's got to deal with their own individual stuff, and then hopefully it will cascade to the max? Or are there some bigger situations we can put into place to kind of like anchor in these realizations of loving presence?
It's a beautiful question. Just as you asked the question, Markabadi, I felt this wave of sadness just roll right up my body, and tears. And there is a level of sadness, probably covered up by anger, in definitely being expressed in the world today as we see it. And whether you see this, and hear these words in real time, or 20 years from now, it'll probably still be true that the human experience is is infused with all manner of emotion. And this is why I was excited to share about the Mycelium Network. And I'll get back to that in a second, is because it's a yes and what you just shared, Markabadi, this idea that we each must do this work, not because, and not because it'll heal the world, although it will, but because we don't have to, the human experience does not have to be constant suffering. It absolutely includes times of depression and sadness. I have been in moments of my life where I've locked myself in a cabin in the woods and cried myself to sleep for weeks on end. I've gone through those moments where despondency and sadness permeates every cell in my body. And I'm grateful now, having gone through that, I'm grateful for my determination to stay in it and not distract myself with alcohol or drugs or sex or TV or anything like that, but to stay in that because of everything staying in that has taught me. This is why holding each other in those moments is so important, because the more we can support each other in feeling, the more safely we learn to feel.
Right.
That's the question I ask myself every day. How can I hold you and you and you and you more safely so that you can feel safe enough to feel safely?
That's beautiful. And so then let's get on to the mycelium and this notion that we're all connected. And, you know, how much does the as above, so below, as below, so above, how much do the micro changes that I am making in my being affect the web around me?
Yeah, great question. So let me just share briefly. When I was a child, I grew up in upstate New York, spending a lot of time in the mountains of upstate New York in this beautiful mountain chain called the Adirondack Mountains. There's such beautiful, breathtaking, by most American standards who are used to the Rockies and the Sierras, the mountains are more like hills. But they're breathtakingly beautiful. The wildlife is abundant, and Theodore Roosevelt spent a lot of time in the Adirondacks as a child. It shaped his worldview on conservation and his understanding of the natural world and the interconnected nature of nature. And I used to walk through the woods and play. I'd play hours and hours and hours in the woods, and invariably I would trip over a log and flip a log that was rotting on the ground wide open. And I noticed there were these nets of white filaments, and the scientific name for these white filaments just completely flew out of my brain. But anyway, these filaments connect through a network underground. All of the mushrooms that you see popping up, more or less all of them, are connected through this network underground. Like you said, so as above, so below. And I like it. And so that phenomenon blew me away as a kid. And I was always wondering, what is that? It kind of scared me, actually, when I would ooh, it looks like an alien creature from outer space, And then as I studied ecology and natural history in college, I learned about the Mycelium Network, this network of filaments of living tissue that scientists have studied and realized that through this network underground for miles and miles and miles transmits information literally from one mushroom or from one tree or one organism over here, way over here, to miles and miles and miles away to another organism. They are communicating with one another energetically. And we can't interpret that language yet, but they're communicating with one another. We know this energetically. Like aspen trees do the same thing. A grove of aspens over here, miles and miles away on the other side of a highway, communicating and actually diverting resources to one another over this network. Fascinating to me. And as I grew in college, studied in comparative theology and all these different philosophies, realize that that is such a perfect metaphor for the universe, that all the infinite possibility of the wisdom and the love of the universe expresses as pops up through the ground, so to speak, as you, one mushroom over here in Hawaii, as me, one mushroom over here in LA, as, you know, and that when, because we also know in the natural world, when we do one thing, when we pollute a pond in the mountains, that poisons the fish.
Right.
An eagle comes down and grabs one of those fish and eats the fish. And then the eagle poops in a meadow, and the meadow grows and feeds the mice, and the mice are carrying those long chain polymers from that poison. As well, we know this from the studies around Roundup and Monsanto and all the long chain polymer poisoning that is happening in our environment. And those long chain polymers don't break down. They take years and years and years and years and decades and decades and decades to break down, to become inert. And in the meantime, they mess up our DNA. So we know that these little, not so little, an impact over here, absolutely, through this living network, impacts somebody over here. And if that's true with nutrition, then what we know about quantum physics and the energy of our heart and our minds, it feels absolutely certain that that would be true for human emotion and beings. And the best part of it is they've actually done research about this. The Heart Math Institute here in California, we know that right now your heart and my heart are talking to each other. They know that if we're vibing on the same frequency, our hearts are tuning into the same radio station. It's called coherence, right? So, and we also know that you get 5,000 people in coherence, we influence the quantum field.
Right.
They've done research. It's called the Maharaji effect. They've done research. 5,000 people meditate for reducing violent crime in a specific period of time. And what happens? Violent crime over that specific period of time reduces by a statistically significant number. In this case, 24% in the study of the Washington, D.C. study.
I always thought maybe that was because the 5,000 people were the criminals who were doing the meditation.
So even, right, you pick the right people. And
exactly. They're meditating, they can't steal anything.
Nice. So that's a long way of saying what happens over here affects what happens here. And it makes perfect sense. And you look at the data and it's true.
I mean, it's obvious to us. Like me and you, it's obvious. Probably people watching, it's obvious. How can we make it obvious to the rest of the world? Because isn't it then unsolicited advice? Aren't we like, like how do we create an environment that enables people to realize the subtle entanglement of us all? Because like I'm interested in the big picture. I could go and, be a monk on top of a mountain and meditate all day. And I think I would quite enjoy that, tend my garden and, look at the sunset, just enjoy life, just live. But there's a part of Markabadi that really wants to have an impact and help and be of service to the world as much as I can. And if I'm going to do it, I want to do it in my triple Leo way, big and bright.
Nice. Okay, now that just made some things make sense to me. I'm a Leo too. That's great.
Right. So how can we, how can we help the rest of the world? How can we be in service to the rest of the world without overstepping the whole, unsolicited advice? And then, because unsolicited advice meets a defense, it's kind of like
it has to.
Someone comes and tells you how you are. It's like,
right.
I feel it in me, and I'm relatively open to reflection. I still feel the resistance. Imagine these, MAGA hat people who are very limited experience of the world. What do we do? I mean, is it creating online channels, or do we have to cloak it in entertainment and comedy? I mean, do we have to make a Hollywood blockbuster with people dying and then kind of some deep philosophical realization at the end?
Subliminal messages.
How do we,
with every
what's the
explosion,
future
it's like
look
a little,
like? Yeah, exactly. Love.
little message of your love. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that is the question right now. And for especially, I mean, I know in the spiritual community, I don't even know what that means, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That there's a conversation. Okay, what do we do? What can we do? What can we do? And the first thing that comes into my mind, and Voltaire said this too, tend to your garden. Tend to your own garden. We must be love. The first thing you can do, you want to have an impact in the world, be love. And I don't know what that means. That could mean for you something completely different than what it means for me.
Right.
Because what it means for me with a platform and audiences and my coaching, all that, is to be love and hold other leaders in being love. That's how I know I'm impacting the planet. And stepping on the biggest stages I can, reaching the biggest audiences I can, and making sure that I'm present, dropped in, being the most accurate expression of love I can possibly be. And what that means sometimes is confronted, like, I love what you said about the mega hats. And I have been in conversation with people who I don't understand at all. I don't understand how somebody could possibly have that perspective. I don't understand how somebody could possibly believe that particular assertion. I don't understand how that person could possibly take a stand for that behavior. And my biggest challenge is to find in me the love to hold that without judgment, shame, blame, or guilt, and to say, if I have the opportunity, please help me understand this, with an actual, authentic curiosity, not with a agenda to convince you otherwise. And that's important, because does George want to change their mind? Yes. I want to change their mind. I can't believe some of the hate, some of the anger, but I know that underneath that is a voice that has been hurt people hurt. Right. And I don't, and yeah, is it a liberal bleeding heart, blah, blah, blah? Yes, absolutely. I own that and wear it proudly. I care about that person's heart, because I know that, and this could be a fantasy, but I know if that heart could be healed, it would hurt less. It would hurt other people less. It would judge less. It would be less a big, there would be less bigotry and less racism and less judgment and less. Yeah. So I don't know the answer. And I do feel like it starts with each of us. Tend to our own garden, love, uncover and examine and inquire and seek to heal every aspect where we're not loving ourselves. That's step one. That could take a lifetime.
Right. And, things of this conversation, I often like to refer to the sort of duality of the Maya, duality of creation, and the yin and the yang, the masculine and feminine. It seems like we have been living in society from a very patriarchal place. There are top-down models of like, right, everyone, you do this. I'm the Lord, you're the peasants, you do this. Blah, blah. I'm the king, you're the Lord, they're the peasants. Everyone. So there's this patriarchal thing. And now we're seeing this. In fact, for the last 100 years, we've seen the kind of meeting of the patriarchal with other patriarchal energies, like, the Occupy movement, and now, the protests and the riots. They're kind of patriarchal. But then we saw examples of more matriarchal, more feminine spaces with, like, Gandhi and MLK, and people who held a peaceful space for the change to occur. How do we counterbalance the desire to kind of meet fire with fire? Like, you've got a bully who's angrily attacking you, and you want to step up and angrily attack them and beat them. But then it's like one person's winning, one person's losing, always.
Yeah.
So is there a new model for this, like, curious, loving space that isn't allowing ourselves to be abused, or is allowing ourselves to be abused part of the love? Like, there was a story I think somebody told, I can't remember whether it was online or not, but it was, the Dalai Lama, he was giving a talk, and then he got news that the Chinese soldiers came in and mutilated and killed some of the monks, 3 monks, and he announced it. He said, "I've just heard this news." And he said, let us have a moment of silence, and let us all consider how awful and bad, and then let's send loving energy to the soldiers that committed those crimes.
Yeah.
So is there a deep, like, subtle magic to being susceptible, to not fighting back?
It's a great question. It's a big question.
Yeah. I don't deal in little ones here, George.
Yeah, good for you. Sorry, I know I've said that many times because you're asking great questions. This piece of fighting back, like, if we call that resistance, then whenever we offer resistance, the force against that resistance has to grow. When I was healing with my first experience with leukemia 15 years ago, I came to associate the cancer that was taking over my body. I envisioned this as I likened and visualized this cancer as a dragon. In this case, my dragon, like, I have a philosophy of the 3 dragons, I call the big 3 fears in our lives: the fear of death, the fear of loss of love, respect, and admiration, and the fear of poverty. And the cancer that was taking hold of my body was the representation of that cancer, that dragon of the fear of death.
Right.
And I recognized, in a meditation, I became very aware that when I'm wrestling the dragon gets stronger too.
Yeah, it's like the feed the wolf trick.
Feed the wolf, exactly. Trick, exactly. And so when I realized, okay, wait a second, maybe I need to make peace. And I've spoken to tens of thousands of cancer survivors and patients about this idea of making peace with disease in order to create an environment in our bodies hospitable to healing. And there's a process that I teach around that, and it's really quite potent, and I've used it twice, and along partnered with Western medicine. I've recovered from both of those experiences 100%. And the reason I mention that is because this idea of when we wrestle with our dragons, the dragons get stronger too. So what would it be like to meet that with an eye towards peace? When Gandhi was talking about non-violent civil protest, and Martin Luther King Jr. and also what I'm really inspired by are these nations led by women in our world today, whose countries appear to be managing all of the challenges of the modern world significantly better than the Western world. Their responses to the pandemic, New Zealand, for instance, under the leadership of this brilliant prime minister, Lucinda, I think her name is, she's brilliant. Under her leadership, no new diagnoses in a world that's, keeps increasing diagnoses. So that's substantial to me. And I think Denmark and some of these other nations where the prime minister and leadership is guided by the feminine, I think we have to pay attention to that, Markabadi. We need to really look at that, like not as a feminist issue, although if it is, great, but as a governance issue.
Right.
There's something here. There's something really important to look at that, because, and again, this isn't a boo men and yay women, although definitely yay women, right? But yay men too, because when we really say, okay, who's really good at what we need right now? And there's something magical about feminine leadership that makes space for the best of us to come out.
Make space. I like that. Yeah.
You know, because I mean, if you go meta, talk about the feminine being a space for just an open space for pure possibility to express itself, then the best of that possibility will express itself. And when a bully emerges in that space, if we meet that bully with another bully, mayhem. You know, what did somebody say about war? When the elephants make love, the grass suffers. There's an old African proverb. It's about war. When the elephants make love, the grass suffers. And it's a metaphor about war, like trampling, and nobody wins, right? And this war seems to have been a particular embraced particularly by the masculine. And I think it's time to de-emphasize that. It's kind of it's had its turn as a solution, and it's not a solution.
Can the feminine do war? I mean, isn't the principle of the feminine the acceptance? And a question, is peace about acceptance? And if it is feminine, the feminine energy, not talking about women or men, but the feminine energy, which we've all got, is the feminine energy that same energy of acceptance, and thus is the feminine energy peace? And can masculine energy ever be peace? Because isn't the masculine energy like a target? Like I'm shooting at that target, and because I'm aiming at that target, it means I'm rejecting every other target on the 360-degree option. So can masculine ever deal with peace, and is feminine our peace method?
Yeah, it's a great, I'm going to stop saying that. Yeah. I think the answer is yes. It's a great question. Okay. Yes, I think the answer is yes. That because I don't know that the masculine energy is fueled by an imperative to war or conflict, but the masculine energy is a defined, like it's taking all of the matter and defining it into something, or all of potential and defining it into something. That's a masculine concept, right? Defined matter versus space, possibility, potentiality. Defined matter, possibility. So if we live in a world that believes that two ideas cannot coexist in the same space, which physicists are challenging now, right? If we live in a world of zero sum in game theory, right? Either this or this, the two can't exist together. As long as we embrace that as true, then these two will have to fight it out to exist in the same space. But if we dispel the myth of zero sum, if we say, no, wait, your idea of governance this way and my idea of governance this way don't have to be in conflict, how do we make that so? And then if both people say, well, I'd rather wrestle with you to figure out how we make it so than fight with you trying to make one so and the other not so. And if we can put our arms around that, we have a solution to war. But as long as we believe that one way or another, or, you know, you and I can't coexist on the same planet, or zero sum, if in order for you to win, I have to lose. As long as we embrace that theory, that philosophy, we'll have a problem. And why I think feminine leadership is so potent, especially right now, is because in that open space, there's no determination that one thing can exist and the other thing, you know, there's no zero sum in the open space.
I had a poking from the feminine in the kitchen, and she referred to the notion of language, like what way are we imprisoning ourselves with the current language we use?
Oh, I love this. Tracy and I were just talking about this last night. We go into meditation every Wednesday night. It's sort of our date night, our spiritual date night.
Nice.
And we were talking about this exact idea, that the moment we even open our mouths and put a word to something, we are limiting the infinite.
Absolutely.
And the challenge with that is, even as conscious and the effort you and I are making in this conversation to understand each other, Markabadi, even in that context, every word I say has to go through the labyrinth of your experience to even get to the part where your subconscious or your nervous system says, I agree with that, or don't agree with that, or I'm open to that, or I'm not open to that. The labyrinth of your experience. And so this effort to understand one another even becomes more important. Like if you and I were, if I was speaking Russian and you were speaking French, we would really have to make an effort to understand each other. We'd have pads and pens out, and we'd be drawing pictures, and we'd be, if we were committed to it, we'd be really working hard.
Right.
And in a way, that's what we're being called to do right now. The streets are speaking for themselves. They're saying, hey, like it or not, we've got to understand each other.
Yeah, so I mean, I love that with the language, and as soon as we articulate, we've already compressed the wave function, if you like, from a wave partiality point. Now, with regards to that, let's talk a little bit quickly. We're coming to the end. It's so good to talk to you, George.
You too, brother. Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about magic, which came up yesterday in our call, and the notion of magic, and the notion that in order to do the manifestation of something in the world, magic, one has to have a very specific intent. So one has to, collapse the wave function right to the edge of the specificity. Now, this is a theory, because I was asking, the magician that was on call, do you have to have an intent? Because I don't really have any intents. My intents are so general. Like, I want to bring general love. Now, the question is, do we need to get very specific in order to have great impact? If we're targeting everyone, are we thus targeting no one? For want of a better use of analogy.
Yeah, that's a good. That's right on the nose. I think that
you need a thesaurus for that's a great question.
Right, you're right. That's
right on the nose, a nail on the hammer and the head.
In the marketing world, for instance, that appears to be true. Whenever I've gone out, for instance, with these really general messages without a specific, what the marketing world calls an avatar, without a specific example of a person I've worked with and helped create real transformations with in mind, those messages have lacked gravitas. And yet, when I sit and imagine, oh yes, this person, I worked with this person, and we were able to create some superb transformations in his life in the world, or her life in the world. I'm going to speak and write to that person. When we've done that, more people like that respond, because that's the vibration, the frequency we're in. So it does feel important to. And I think this is what we were talking about with the magicians last night, was that it's more about the frequency than the image. The reason why the image becomes important is because most of us need the image to find the frequency. So if I say, I want a new car, and then somebody calls me up and says, hey, I got a minivan, I'm not using it anymore, do you want it? And I'm like, well, that's not really what I had in mind. My minivan days are over. So in that regard, I didn't put the right frequency out. But if I just use, 1965 boat tail Corvette in sparkly ice blue with the and get really specific about that, and then say that or something even better, because the vibration that I've created It's
Right.
about the feeling in my heart,
Right.
like, oh, that car would really turn me on, you know?
Right.
And what I could do with that car, flip the top down, drive up the PCH, and oh man, would that feel good? And then it's done. The prayer has been made. The feeling is the prayer, right? And then just let it go.
Mm-hmm.
And then just let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I mean, that's my feeling. I don't know if that's the formula, if that's the right thing or not. I know that for me, that feeling has been so important. One, possibly because it's manifesting power, but for me, on a much more practical level, because of the frequency it puts me in, I make better decisions from that place. I'm more purposeful in that place. I speak more authentically from that place. And the moment that moment is gone, it's not about the car, it's about the space I'm occupying.
Mm.
Right?
No. Yeah, it's not about the car, it's about the space you occupy.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Wow. What a great chat.
Oh, beautiful. It's really such a pleasure.
Thank
Thank
you
you so
so
much.
much. Thank you, George. Tell us about, like, you see clients, you know, can people come to you individually?
Absolutely. We
Yeah.
usually start with, a conversation, find out where somebody is. And we have all sorts of, we have programs and things that people can start with. If somebody's really serious about stepping in and bringing like occupying that space I was talking about, we have programs and real pathways to that greater expression. Always happy to have that conversation.
Wonderful. Right. All on your website, I assume.
Yeah.
And what about like group stuff? Are you doing webinar type of things in this day and age?
Yeah, we just finished a live virtual event last month. We're going to do another one in July. I'm sort of mindful of doing dates and stuff here because people may see this months from now. But we're always we're always working on how can we bring more conversations to a higher frequency so we can bring healing to the planet. So we're always looking at different ways to do that. So we're Facebook Lives and live virtual events. And of course, when we're not in quarantine, we're hosting live events and gatherings and doing it that way too.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I just want to give a reflection for somebody who posted, Q Stern, saying that your words are not limiting, they're inspiring. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you very much. Beautiful.
Reflection. And thank you for everyone who's tuned in and stayed with us for this such informative hour where, you know, we're embracing the paradox of both doing and the allowing, which seems to be where all transformational magic occurs.
Yeah. Well
Thank
said.
you so much, George.
Thank you,
it's
brother.
been such a pleasure. I'm going to close out the show, but I mean, I don't want to leave you. We'll have to talk more. All right.
I look forward to it.
Thank you so much for coming on and giving us your time, George. It's your wisdom and awareness of the processes. It's just so inspiring, as Stern said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, what a show! I mean, you know, I was one of my favorite chats. I think this is why I do this show. Is not for you, sorry. It's actually for me. It's for me to hear a reflection. It's for me to have the mirror of this wisdom, and the wisdom is that there is power in love and loving acceptance, and that it's not a weakness to be loving and accepting. And this notion that our society is built up around the oppression of people, the masculine, the dominating patriarchal oppression of one person over another. So now we have this 1% little tiny rulers of the world. That notion is been embedded into our society, and it comes embedded into our consciousness. And we can shift it because it's not fair, it's not balanced, it's not a thriving model. In fact, it's a destructive model that is destroying the planet. There's no permaculture to it, and there's no eco-permaculture, nor is there social permaculture. So if we want this social permaculture, we have to look to ourselves with a loving, accepting space for the areas we're uncomfortable. And that is the same when we talk to somebody. What would happen if instead of meeting let's call it a ridiculous opinion, instead of meeting a ridiculous opinion with, no, this is the obvious right one, come on, instead of doing that, what would happen if we curiously inquired? Real, authentic inquiry. Tell me about your ridiculous position, without saying ridiculous position. Tell me about your opinion. I'm really curious, and genuinely be a space of curiosity to allow them to be heard. Greatest gift you can give anyone is the space to be heard. And what would happen if that angry part of them that was never heard can now be heard? How would they cascade out of their flower pod? How would they germinate? How would they grow? And what impact would that have on the rest of the world? You know, we all want to impact the world. We all want to, you know, I mean, that's why the stardom, being a star is so, oh, look at, they're famous. I mean, what is that? All it is having influence and power and being important and accepted and loved. Now, what if in every moment you talk to the milkman or the person in the newsagent stand or whatever, I'm talking British terms now, whatever, the shop assistant, you go and you offer that principle of the universe, that unconditional acceptance and curiosity, and like space to be heard. Here is your space to be heard. How would that cascade? It would be exponential, because you would offer it there. Let's say you meet 10 people in your day, and then those 10 people go out and they cascade and they do it. And pretty soon you are around the planet. Your impact, you, is around the planet by who you spoke to, those 10 people you spoke to today. Get comfortable with your own discomfort. That's what this is about. Honoring the feelings, honoring the self as we can honor others. And remember, our words are specific. They are codes, they are magic, they are incantations. As soon as we speak them, the codes. Oh, wow. Thank you so much. Thank you to my guest, George Peter Kansas, Reverend GPK, Rev GPK, Rev GP. I have a book, Book Evolve, bookevolve.com. You can check it out. You can see it online. There's also an e-version. I'm working on the audio version. I'll do that soon. Please like, share. I think the share buttons are here. Shares are always the best for me. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in and for liking, sharing, and doing all that fun stuff. Markabadi signing out. Much love.